Hello, Andrew Michael Storm here. Recently, my friend and composing partner from the UK, Andy Chesterton, asked me if I would talk a little bit about my inspiration behind our musical play Twilight Time, and I'm more than happy to do so. Twilight Time is an interesting piece because it speaks a lot about spirits, in a sense. It speaks a lot about the mind, and it speaks a lot about aging, and it speaks loads about family, and it does all this in the context of a life in the theater, because Twilight Time is about an elderly, once very famous theatrical star who now lives a life of semi-loneliness in her penthouse apartment overlooking Broadway. She was very famous and a very famous theater star in her past. Now she tends to be lonely. She lives with her granddaughter and with her virtually worthless son, who is in his 50s, yet still lives with his mother. He's never worked in his life, and yet, though he depends on her, he detests her. He detests the fact that she is what she is, and he is what he is. She also has the company or companionship, though often unwanted, of three spirits from her family, that being her daughter, who is her granddaughter's mother, who is also a very famous actress, though mostly in film, and who took her own life years ago. She's also accompanied by her ne'er-do-well former husband, who was essentially a gigolo. He tends to be the most irritating of the spirits who speaks with her. And she is lovingly accompanied by the spirit of her young son, Charlie, who was killed in an accidental fall from the balcony of this very penthouse at age 12. Charlie is probably the most welcome of all the visitors because he is very comforting, very loving, and he is eternally 12 years old and a precocious child. One may ask, where do you get an inspiration for a story such as this? Well, there are plenty of aging former stars who tend to live out their later years in, say, reclusion, maybe because they're no longer as desired as they once were in the business, and maybe because they're no longer the handsome or beautiful people they were when they were stars, or maybe simply because they just decide that in later life they'd rather just be alone and be peaceful and still and not involved in the hectic everyday hubbub of being a star, being in the public light. And it makes you wonder if perhaps people like that tend to end up with visions, perhaps, with spirits that accompany them from their past. Through the entire story of Twilight Time, we have to wonder, are these spirits real, or are they just a figment of her imagination? Marion Raymer is a very strong character. She was a very strong woman throughout her life. And you say, well, how could someone like that have such delusions if they're not real? Memories can become like realities when memories are virtually all we have left. You can find yourself talking to yourself as though you were talking to someone from your past. And if you allow it to blossom to the point, you can see that perhaps you would suddenly be speaking to people from your past who are no longer with us. So that could be an explanation of something like that. And there are many people who believe that there are spirits, that there are people who remain with us long after their death for one reason or other. There have been countless number of movies and plays and musicals written about such spirits, about ghosts, what have you. And such writing comes from at least a tacit belief that certain things are possible. I myself believe very likely that things like that are possible. I have had experiences where, it's not a lengthy thing, but I've had experiences where I thought I saw someone out of the corner of my eye from my past, or I thought I heard a voice from my past. It's not an infrequent thing with me. I have that happen now and then. Where does that come from? Does it come from the mind? Is it actually there? Who knows? But it does make for good theater. And when I set out to do this, I also included a character in this who is an old friend and her manager for many, many years, named Alvin Dragon. And he is perhaps her best friend in life while being her manager. He is frustrated with the fact that she hasn't worked in many, many years and has no desire to work. He tries to encourage her to work again, to do one last big theatrical event, perhaps to help him through his later years. She has no idea that he has had financial ills for many years, because when she was very famous, she became his only client, and he spent all his time working with her. As she retired, he no longer was popular as a manager and an agent. Therefore, he found it difficult to find new clients. So he ended up as a manager with his only client being a client that never worked and never brought in any money. Even though he lives quite frugally, owns his own apartment, owes very little debt, just living in New York is quite expensive. And he has discovered that his savings and everything over the years were not enough to keep him living the way he did. So he had begun skimming money from her accounts, because she's quite wealthy, and she never noticed because he manages all her business. But she begins to wonder if something funny is not going on, and she actually discovers in Act 2 that he has been doing this and confronts him about it. Is this an unusual situation? I don't think so. How many of us have heard of long-term stars who have had their long-term managers, especially if they're a manager who only has that star as a client? How many of us have heard of those people having that person end up stealing from them or taking from them? It tends to be a very challenging thing to be a long-term manager, especially managing all their money, all their business and everything, and to look at all that money sitting there and very little of it is yours. And especially once they become semi or completely retired and you no longer have income coming in, and all the money you get is just from your percentage of managing the money they already have. And a lot of people have succumbed to that challenge, to that tease that's there in front of them, that carrot on the stick. So explaining Alvin Dragon is not hard. Of course, at the end there is a resolution. During the course of this play, we find that two of the four living characters end up meeting their end also. We discover that perhaps the spirits are more real than they are fantasy. And at the end of the story, we are left with just Marion and her granddaughter, Marley. And they are joined at the very end by the three former spirits and the two new spirits of the two that have passed on during the play. So where we started with 7 characters, 3 of whom were spirits, 4 of whom were living. At the end we have 2 living characters and 5 spirits. Twilight Time is not just a spiritualist study. It's a story of how we age, how life takes twists and turns. It's a story of how we manage to live beyond our tragedies. It's a story of how everybody has to deal with life, and you either persevere or you give up. Marion, though she has her doubts, is not a person that gives up. She does persevere and she does make it through. Twilight Time is populated by 12 musical numbers. Twilight Time is a musical play, as I said. It is not a musical in the sense there's no dance numbers, there's no big production numbers. There are just 7 characters, and there are 12 songs that actually propel the story and drive the story as much as the book itself. And Twilight Time is written, the book and the lyrics are by myself. The music is by Andy Chesterton. I think Andy has captured the spirit of the story itself in the music that he used. And I think everybody can draw something from their own life from what Twilight Time says. And I think especially theater people will be able to draw from their experiences, especially as they age and as they are around for years and years and as maybe they're not as hot as they once were. It's a story of aging either well or not so well. It's a story of people that have given up and people that have persevered. And that basically is life. So where did the inspiration for Twilight Time come from? It came from my experiences in the entertainment business and in theater, from my aging process, and from life. Because Twilight Time is a story of life set around people in the entertainment industry. So hopefully this gives you some notion as to what inspired Twilight Time and a little bit of background behind the story itself. So when Twilight Time is in the theater, hopefully you'll go see it, and I hope you enjoy it. This is Andrew Michael Storm saying goodbye till later. Go see a show. Thank you very much.
My curtain will come down in my twilight time. And days are lonely, but nights are worse. Songs become so sad in the final verse. We have lines to say just to make it rhyme. I'll take my final bow after twilight time. I'll take my final bow after twilight time.